Right.
There's the spooky voice. Give me 1 second to make sure that I can see the chat as well. Cool. Yeah, Zoom is great. I always, every time I open up Zoom, I always have complaints about how, like, once you start sharing your screen, you can have it on one window consolidated into like one view, and then you start sharing and it breaks it into 3 floating windows. Fantastic. Anyways, welcome to the Dev Bootcamp. Again, this is the 4th session, 3 weeks in a row. The past sessions, we have gone over some basic Flask stuff. We're not going to touch Musk, if not any Flask today. We've done some back-end work, some little bit of front-end here and there with regards to structural thing. We've done some Ginger as well. But mostly the website that we've been building hasn't looked too good. I mean, obviously, it's when it comes to building websites, I find it's always like the iceberg of the complexity is actually underneath all the actual code. Like, you can look at something that might look simple, but in reality, the actual logic required to build it is quite complex. Like the whole blog page, this page has not much stuff on it. We look at a post and, a lot of work went into doing the actual wiring up of this. But if you were to ask someone, is this a good blog? And does this look nice? I hope the answer is no. And that is purposeful. It's purposefully kind of has just random impact font and borders and just 1, 2, 3, 4 in the top with the about page, and you'll see pretty much nothing is centered. Everything's to the left side of the screen, and like I don't even know what's happening down here. And I mentioned before, the best bit is this renders as cursive text in Mac OS, and in Windows, this renders as Comic Sans, which is fantastic. But today, we're going to make this version of the website look a lot closer and likely, hopefully, better than the example version, which is the example version as well is purposely simple in that there's not a lot of stuff happening. But the idea is with this one, you've got things centered on the screen. You've got this nice top bar with the name on one side and all the buttons on the right with the bar at the bottom. You've got then, the main, like, hello, my name is, with an image with a border is still the case, but, it's a lot better than, a picture of peppers with the inset border with some text on the bottom. One thing too about the example one, we have these 3 social buttons, which you'll actually notice are on every single page because they are added at the level of the layout. The contact page as well is quite a lot more advanced in this version, and the project page is also has images and some nice spacing and so on and so forth. The blog as well, with some nice UI, making it look a lot better. So we're going to cover today how you basically take this and bring it closer to this, and hopefully we're going to make some changes to make it pop a bit when it comes to color and maybe even some animations. So to get started, 1 second to move some windows around. We are going, so we've recapped what we did the last sessions. We did some back-end work. This was the back-end piece. We did the blog post piece. So we're not going to touch most actual logic today. We've shown you this example project, what we're going to do. So the first thing I think is we're going to make the top of the page look a bit closer to this and less like this. To talk about that too, I'm going to start doing some code and I'm going to start writing some CSS, but I realize I haven't actually taught what CSS is. So we're going to be getting into a better definition of what CSS actually is and how it combines itself with HTML to make websites look less like this. So you'll notice if you look at our layout page, we have a ordered list with a bunch of A tags like so. One thing is, I don't really think you need to have these things numbered. So if we make this from an OL, like we said before, an ordered list to a UL, this will change from being like so to not hot refreshing. Give me 1 second. Should be
You
hot
forgot to
refreshing.
change the opening tag from OL to UL.
Oh,
The first tag.
go. That would do it.
Okay, yeah.
But it's also not refreshing still. So I had that working. Give me 1 second. Ah, Flask environment. Yeah, another thing to point. If you want hot reloading, you have to do Flask. Make sure Flask env is set to development, and then Flask will kick in. This also still isn't working. I'm doing something wrong.
Still on ordered list.
Oh, UL. I meant to change both of them to UL. I changed it back to UL. Yeah, don't worry about me. Here we go. So now we have this dots in a row. But we also then have, some text on the side there. So how exactly would you structure that? So this conceptually is a nav bar. And let's say you want to have our text at the beginning. So let's do this, and let's do our name as we've done before, which we use the Ginger template. Now we have on one side, we have Jack, and then below we have this. But we actually need to do some CSS to make this look the way we want to do it. So I'm going to open up this, and I'm going to take away the bulk of what's already here, so we can kind of start fresh again from like nothing to something. Which you'll see now, we've got images. It looks pretty much the same because we had basically no CSS there before, but we've got our pretty much plain HTML. And we want to look at this. This text here is a bit bolder. So we're going to come into the layout HTML, and I'm going to type nav p. I'm going to say font weight bold. So this here is a selector. So what this is saying that please apply this rule to every p tag that is the child of a nav tag. So in this case, if we have, this p name here, but if we also take this and put a p name below the body, you'll see that we get one of them is just normal text, but the next one is our bolded text. This is a selector, and this in here is the actual rules, which is usually a key value pair of the rule name and the rule value. So if we wanted, to make this text decoration underline, and of course I'm getting these auto highlights from VS Code, which is quite useful. There's the page. You'll see it's now underlined like so. All of these A tags have dots on them, but you'll see here that I can also inspect element to view the HTML of this page. This is just a nav bar with a p tag and a UL to the right with some LIs as well. But you'll notice that this is rendering completely differently than the other one. One of the nice things about websites is that although you can't inspect a website source code, you can inspect a website's HTML and CSS. So one thing you'll see here, and I'll just show how I got here again, I right-clicked on the About and I did Inspect, and it brought me in my browser's developer tools to that specific A tag. I can, click on the nav and see the nav itself. And notice that the nav has two things here. It has a border bottom 2px solid black, and it also has a margin bottom 1.5 rem. So I can take that, you can steal that CSS and put that in our nav. So let's give that to our nav. Formatting is correct. Yeah, refresh our page here. There we go. So we get a similar underline to the other page. Going to remove the extra example p tag that I added. But I'm still going to notice that I still have this list of things here that I don't really like. This looks good if I was writing a blog post or a document, but this is supposed to be a nice nav bar at the top. So if you look at the UL, you'll see that UL has a couple of properties on it. It has nav UL. So the nav itself is the same, but nav UL has float right, list style none, and padding left to 0. So I'm just going to take this. So it says that it should apply it to nav UL, which means any UL that is children of a nav. And it's going to post in some code. Float right, list style type none, padding left 0. So this isn't rendering exactly how we want it just yet, which is okay. But you already noticed that we've got something that's now floating to the right of the screen. We don't have the dots anymore, and they themselves do not have any padding. Well, let's actually see now why this applying the CSS isn't actually working properly. So the nav itself has these properties, and the list items, yes. So we have this one, which is nav ul-li, which is applying CSS to every single list item that's the child of ul, that's the child of nav. And it's saying display inline block, margin left 1 rem. I'm kind of paraphrasing and skipping a couple of things, but I'm just kind of showing you a workflow that you can do, because thankfully with CSS, you can copy and paste stuff from elsewhere and use other people's stuff. Press the page again, just like that. We're still not where we want it to be, but however, we do now have actual, it's in an actual logical role instead of being all in one big list like that. So we've gone from, what we had before, which if we take away these CSS definitions, we just had, pretty plain list of things like this. We've taken that and we've applied all this CSS to it. It's even cool too, if you want to see how things would look like, is you can inspect things using the inspector, and then you see this little checkbox next to these. So if we uncheck display inline block, you'll see they go from displaying in their usual place. So the default is display block, but we stated that we want to display inline block, which is the exact same property as before, but instead it's inline. So I realize I'm talking about a lot of pretty complex CSS stuff, and it would be useful to actually now talk about what exactly is CSS and what are all these property types and how exactly do they, you can talk about CSS and see the actual code, but how does it end up actually making things look different? So CSS itself stands for cascading style sheets. So it allows you to create great looking web pages, but it itself, it is a language. Like HTML is a language, CSS is a language, and CSS itself is meant to define style sheets. Style sheets themselves are what we're writing here. In this case, we're embedding it directly into HTML. You could, of course, break this out into its own separate file and into many other files, but in this case, we do just have it all inline within the layer HTML. And you usually use it for specifying how documents are presented to users, how they're styled, laid out, etc. You wouldn't actually put content in CSS. You would never do like nav inner HTML jack. Like that's not what CSS is used for. HTML itself is what you actually, you put your content and you use your CSS to actually describe how you would style it. There's a few resources you can use. There's also one by Google called learn web.dev/learn/CSS. And here they go across quite a few things. You'll see there's quite a few chapters in here. Thankfully, you don't need to know everything to know CSS. But like one example they give is the concept of the box model. So we talked about before with paragraph tags like this. If you have a p tag with I am a paragraph of text that has a few words in it, if you write some CSS for it, so in this example, they're giving a specific width in pixels, specific height of pixels, they're giving a padding, which is space around it as pixels, and giving a border. And they show an example how this actually looks. And this is a classic CSS example of having text that's just breaking out the content it's defined within. Talks about the display values. This is what I was saying earlier about display block. So you use sizing like this to actually make things work properly. In this case, I don't truly know what this demo is actually doing, to be completely honest. But you'll see how block had an effect here. So by default, everything here is displaying as inline block. But if we change this from inline block to something like flex, we get this. If we change it from the inline block to table there's an absolute ton of options here. Usually you do kind of just do either inline or inline block. Inline flex is also a thing technically, but inline block is what we want here. I'm not completely sure why this isn't working properly, but if I go to the nav, the p tag, looks fine there. Oh, the p tag also has to be inline block as well. So what's actually happening here is because the p tag is displaying as block, it's taking up an entire section of the document. But instead, we want the p tag to be an inline block so that it'll actually be okay with having elements on the same line as it. So we go back into here and we do nav p, we do display inline block. Come back into here again. There we go. This still isn't exactly what we had over here, but it's pretty close and it works and everything's displaying correctly. So now let's make things actually middle on the page a bit. So let's take all this stuff here and let's see if we can get all this stuff centered. So everything within the page itself is contained within the content. If we head into about HTML, you'll see we have our H1s and our image and our UL. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to make a div and I'm going to put a class on it called center. I'm going to take the bottom of the div, make sure I put everything within it, and then take all this, put it to the right. So now we've got all the content that we had before indented by one to the right and then wrapped in a div tag, the class itself of center. So if we come in here and we do classes themselves, I'll show them in a second what they're used for. They're very useful because if you have to, describe CSS using the actual things themselves all the time, this cuts down on reusability and makes things much more complex, which you don't want. So if I do dot center, which means this is CSS being applied to the center class, and I do text align center, which, as you would expect, aligns text in the center of the screen. This CSS now will be applied to this div. What's cool about CSS 2 is you can actually do multiple things. If you want to have like red background, like so, we define a dot red background class and do background red, like so. The page, you'll see our entire page now has centered text. And also, if you actually inspect the HTML, you will see that our div, which has two classes on it, center and red background, has these two things applied to it. You can toggle them in the inspector. What's nice about this too is you can actually click on these. They'll bring you directly to where they're defined in the CSS. So sometimes you could have a pretty big style sheet. You could create a div or a nav, and all of a sudden it's red. You might go, what's doing that? So you can go through and see what's actually happening. So we don't need this, we just need center. And you can remove that and remove the red background from the class, leave just center. And you'll see we have, hello, my name is Jack centered. Images themselves also abide by text center. Text center doesn't work for absolutely everything, but it works pretty much most of the time as you expect. So if we compare these sites side by side right now, we can see that they are quite close, but there's a bit of stuff going on that isn't super good. You'll notice this page itself has a bit more spacing on the sides, which is nice. And this one here doesn't. Also, these have a little bit of weird stuff going on with the A tag bottom. I'm not too sure what that is actually. Just inspect them and see if they're doing anything strange. I don't think so. No. What I'm actually going to do is, I'm not a huge fan of the underline. What I'm going to do is going to go to our CSS. I'm going to do A, and I'm going to do text decoration none, like so. Just like that. You don't have any artifacts on the bottom. We can click on the buttons as before, but they don't have underscores. Usually, of course, you'd have underlines if it was Wikipedia, but in the case of this, where these are nav buttons, they're pretty clear, which is okay. But yeah, we still have a bit of spacing here, which is nice, but it doesn't exist over here. What is cool is you can apply CSS to basically any single document. So what this might be is if this might be us applying some padding to the body. So we do padding 0.25 rem, like so. Press the page. You'll see everything just got a bit squatter, but let's make this about 7.5, just to make it a bit more pronounced. And just like that, you'll notice everything in the page just got a little bit closer away from the side. So we actually applied some CSS to the body, which is the topmost element on the page, and it caused everything to contract a little bit. But you'll notice this is being applied both to the corners, but also to the top. So this one's a bit closer to the top of the page, but this one's been moved away. This is where you can get into actual specific sizes. We also do padding right, and then padding left, and just like that, we now have padding being applied to the corners instead of to the top. You could also do this shorthand by doing padding 0, like this. So this will apply to the top and the bottom. Actually, this is what we don't want. This is the opposite. We want this, which is 0. So this will apply 0 padding to the top and bottom, and then 0.75 rem padding to the right and the left. So if you refresh the page, this is what we want, and it's in one line of CSS. If you put your mouse over here as well, you'll see rem itself is it's a relative m, which is a specific unit of measurement. M's themselves are dependent on font size. They're kind of like a unit of measurement that's good to use if you're doing responsive stuff. Like we could make this, 10 pixels, and like pixels are easy to reason about, and they do make sense, I guess, from a conceptual level. But rems themselves, what you can actually do is if you use rems, you can change the font size of the root element in the page, like so. HTML font size large, and it'll actually make everything look a bit bigger. If you use pixels, you wouldn't get that property. You'll see everything gets a little bit bigger when we change the font size on the root element, which is quite useful. One thing I did as well is I don't really want to have this picture of peppers, so I got a picture of myself inside the application. I'm going to delete the old Peppa Pig picture. I'm going to rename this one to image, not rename the directory, rename this to image.jpg, go into about HTML, change this to image.jpg, refresh the screen. You see it's quite a big image, so yet again we can fix that. We had the CSS in here before, but we can add it again and do this is an image that is just here under the center. What I want to do here is I want to do about. So now I can apply an about class to the div. So I can then do dot about image, then max width 70 VW, meaning the viewport width. So this will actually mean that this image can now no longer be more than 70% of the viewport width. To view this on a big monitor, it might look a bit too big, which we actually want to change. I'll change it to like 50 rem. Actually, what I want a max width 100%. Sizing gets quite tricky. Min width 100%. Max width 50 rem. I think this is what I want. Is it? No. Anyways, I'll keep it 60, 70 viewport width for now. Making websites responsive is kind of outside the scope of today's thing, making it both look good on mobile and on desktop. Another thing as well, you can actually head into your inspector, and they have a very useful tool on the right here, which lets you, this button lets you basically see how it'll look on, say, Pixel 2, and then on iPad and iPhone 5, so on and so forth. And you can kind of get experience for how it'll look, or you can just make it responsive so you can then figure out, like, how does it actually function and different directions, which is very useful for making things work on multiple different devices. And our little thing down here, this of course doesn't exist on the website that we built here, but I still think it's good. But it'd be nice if we, instead of having it as a list of things, if we had like a collection of boxes that represent each item. So I'm going to come back into here. I'm going to go to our about HTML, and I'm going to, this is our food list class. I'm going to create this and create a H1 and call it, actually I'm going to put everything here to a div, the class of food list. If I need to get the UL, I can just use a selector. I put everything indented by 1. Let's call this one food list, like so. Still looks fine. Great. I'm going to make this a H5, a bit smaller. Perfect. And instead of making this UL, I'm going to make this a div. I'm going to make these also divs. We'll call this one our container. We'll call this one our item. So I've created a bunch of divs, and right now they will do not much other than break up the things into logical constructs. But with this structure, this makes doing CSS on this a lot easier. So I'm going to take the about HTML. I'm going to go back into here, and I'm going to do dot food hyphen list. Then I'm going to make this have, actually, I won't even touch the food list. I'll do food list dot container. I'm going to set the display on this to flex. So change this, and you'll see all of a sudden all of our food are to the left, and they're in one big row, which isn't that great. But this is actually, like, flex is actually a new thing. If I would have told you about this 6 years ago, flex would have been something that you might have not even been able to use. But flex makes doing things that kind of grow and shrink so much easier. So with flex, I can now do, so flex, and I would say, I want spacing. Is it spacing, or is it, I need to crack open the flex cheat sheet because it has quite a few, flex cheat sheet. It has so many properties. I never remember them. I always have, when I'm at work, I have this open quite a lot of the time. So there's two things here for alignment. There is justify content. You'll see here, by default, it's flex start, or you can do flex end, or you can do center, space between, space around, space evenly. So I think what we want here is space evenly. So I'm going to take this justify content. I'm going to apply this here, space evenly. And just like that, we now have each food item being spaced evenly inside of our content. They still look a little bit lacking though. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply some things to the food list. I'm also going to make this picture of me disappear for now, just so we can focus more on the content below. I'm going to make this have a margin top of 2m to space it from the contents above. Here we go. Now we can focus on the actual flexbox bit. So we have our pizza, tea, cake, baklava, and orange. And to kind of test out how we actually stress test this with a lot more stuff, what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to go to our database that we had before. I'm going to go SQLite3 database.db. I'm going to go back up, and I'm going to write some invalid syntax, likely. So I'm going to I forgot the syntax of what was actually in the database. Give me 1 second to do a schema, insert into food values. Then I'm going to insert, if anyone has any food items they want to throw in the chat, I'll add them to the food database. let's say I would like a cupcake. Let's give me a, what don't we have here? We don't have a lot. Pizza, tea, cake, baklava, orange, banana, potatoes, of course. Potato, salmon, tofu, roast beef, egg, bigger egg, egg 2. So we come back in here. Now we should have a bunch of stuff. You already noticed this is starting to become a bit crowded. If we were to actually, add more things to this list, it would get a bit out of hand, especially if we do this. So the intention I had was to do .food-list.container.item. So now we're selecting this specific item here. Let's say we want this to have a background color of black, a text color of white, a padding of 0.5 rem, and I would like to do food list container item p. Should be fine actually. So when I come back into here, you'll see every item we have in this list is taking a bit more space. It still works, and this isn't bad, but it's most definitely not good, especially if we were to do this. If we go to food list, we say this should have a max width of 50 vertical width. This will indeed end up like this, and this isn't what we want at all. So we actually yet again have a magical thing we can use here, and we can do flex wrap, just like that. Things are now wrapping. What you'll notice is this is starting to have the first things here have a bit of, there's not much space between them, and they're starting to flow into the next one. So I'm going to take away the space evenly, like so. Now you'll see they're going to do it like that. Also then going to do a gap of 1 rem. I think it's gap. I haven't used flex in a while. There you go. Now we actually have a gap in between our items of 1 rem. And if we add more things to it, I'd say it would render a lot better. But you'll notice we added a max width here, 50 in vertical width. We can also make this 50%, which means 50% of the container width it's within. And even though we had the text line center, the text line center doesn't actually apply to the div itself. Text center has no effect on the actual divs. So we're going to have to apply display flex to the layer above so we can actually get our proper style we want. So our about center, I'm going to apply our about display flex, and we're going to unhide the picture of me. And you'll see all of a sudden everything's broken. That's because by default, flex will render things in a row, and what we want is a column. So we want flex direction column. We go to about flex direction column, refresh the page. Looks a lot better, but you'll see things are still a bit offsetted. That is fine. You can then do line items center, like so. And now, there we go. Our page is centered again, the text is centered, the image is centered, and now, even though the food list itself is a complex div with its own things within it, it itself is also centered. I am going to quickly, you'll see there's not much spacing at the bottom of this. I'm going to come into our body, and I'm going to do some more. So we don't want padding on the top, but it feels like we want padding on the sides and the bottom as well. So you might say, well, we have to now do, padding right and bottom and top and all that. There is still shorthand for that. So the first one's top, the second one is right, the third one is bottom, and then the last one will be right again. So it goes top, right, bottom, left. I've just kind of memorized that. Up, right, down, left. Now we come back in here. You'll see we still have, the padding at the top that we have, but now we actually have some spacing at the bottom of the page. just like that. And we have our food list, which all of our stuff in it. If we were to add and remove stuff, we could add as much as we like, and it would render correctly. You can obviously mess around with the settings for your intended UI here. We can make these like huge if we wanted to, technically. You can come in here, make this gap 5. Actually, no, not that. Keep the gap 1 rem and make the padding 5 rem instead of 0.5. Now all of a sudden you've got a bunch of very big food items, and I'd say they're still rendering in what is an acceptable list. You will likely spend a lot of time fighting with CSS to get exactly what you want, and I'm not going to fight with to make this look better than now. Especially because this is variable. Each thing is its own specific width. If we actually come in here, do width, let's make this width 5 rem, like so. So now everything is a nice width. We can now come in here and apply our flex, not flex, justify content center, which does this, which looks, a lot cleaner. Except now, if we have a item name that is for some reason absolutely ginormous, such as the biggest egg I have ever seen in my life, I have never seen such an egg before, because if users put in values, users will indeed put in anything they can, and we get whatever this is, which is, it has the width, but now because the width is constraint and the height isn't, this one has now grown past its bounding box. Well, it hasn't grown past the bounding box, it's just made it a lot bigger. When you hear people talking about the pain of CSS, this is the pain of CSS. And this is why you might do something like, if it's too big, you just end it with a ... so that you don't let it expand its bounding box. But yeah, I could spend decades talking about how to make this stuff actually work properly. Let me just check my notes if there's anything that I haven't discussed or missed. We've talked a bit about CSS. We talked about the box model. We've talked about flex. We've made things, different styles. With what I currently have on page, if anyone has any requests of things they'd like to see, let me know. But if not, the next bit I was going to go on to was going to be color, because obviously the example that I gave before itself was purposely barren of color. But it'd be nice to spend some time actually making the color itself look a bit pop a bit more, such as the background of the entire page itself, or the text, so on and so forth. We are going to get to the blog section and the product section as well. But to be honest, these actually kind of do look nice with no styling. But you can go as heavy or styling, or go as little as you want as well. Doesn't really matter. I'm personally of the club that minimalism is good. My website has technically has one color, and other than its one color is black and white with the A tag styling technically. And some people go and do something crazy. Some people don't even actually use HTML for their websites. You open up a website and it's just 3D because there's nothing stopping you. So, but with regards to this, we're gonna keep things pretty simple, hopefully. So I'm going to use a website that I use quite frequently, and like I said, if anyone has any ideas, drop in the chat. But I will continue nonetheless. I go to this website called Color Hex, which itself you can use as a color picker, and you can get some information about different colors. You can get shades and tints and RGB percentages and monochromatic things. But you can also come up to the top here. You can go to latest palettes, and you can see a big list of different palettes that users have submitted to the site. You'll see quite a lot of horrible color palettes, or color palettes that wouldn't be applicable to a website like we're building, such as Arctic Ice is probably cold, aptly named cool theme. We can go in here. We can look at some top palettes as well, popular palettes. You've got the classic Facebook. You've got some bootstrap colors, pastel colors of the rainbow itself, vaporwave, classic, retro. I kind of like retro. I'm not going to use the red and the teal, but I'm going to steal this color here. I'm going to get into this color. I'm going to grab its pale counterpart here. Get like a nice off yellow. One design tip I've heard is that plain white is a bit too much to the eyes, so therefore doing something along the lines of that. Oh, I realize I haven't actually explained this as well. This is hex. This is a hexadecimal representation of a color. My editor actually allows me to open up a view of it. Usually when people send colors across, they send them as hex codes. You'll see here hex codes themselves technically have RGB values and HSL, CMYK, so on and so forth. But hex is a nice condensed representation of what is usually a lot bigger. So we come back in here now. Our website kind of has a nice little beige yellowy background to it. Let's say go back to this palette and go into this color. Let's grab a darkened version of the brown and let's apply that to every p tag. Actually, we can do that. We can just do p tag and then we can do color this. So now every p tag will have that style applied to it. So this p tag up here, it's very faint, but it does kind of give it a nice little pop. But you'll see not a lot of the page actually has this because not a lot of the pages is a p tag. So I'm just going to try this. This is a bit cursed. I wouldn't recommend it, but I'm going to do star. Star is a catch-all for everything. So I'm going to say everything should be this color. And it indeed has made this colored correctly. But now the A tags are colored and they don't even actually have hovers anymore. And now the blog post is affected too. So we kind of did overshoot and affect too many things. So I'm going to cut this back. But actually, I'm going to make this H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6, and P. And I'm not going to touch A. I'm going to leave A alone. And I'm going to wrap our text here in a span, actually. Spans themselves are similar to p tags, but they don't actually have, these don't render as display block. So I'm going to span as well. I'm just going to ensure that's right. I think this should be good enough. Yeah, so now this is the color we expect it to be. So is this. So is things here. The project list, these are all still colored, but that's fine. But now you'll see everything here is kind of the way we expect it. We can go back in here too. Let's take this nice, actually I'm going to use this teal. I'm going to use this teal and I'm going to apply it to the food item background color. And I'm going to come into the teal and pick a nice complementary white as well if I can. Yeah, we get triadic color and a light version triadic color. I'm kind of most definitely just throwing things around. I'm by no means a color expert at all. But there we go. We get not what I expected. Oh, because it's a span, right? Do food list dot container dot item e dot p span. There we go. I think what I actually wanted to do was to get this teal color, to get a much darker variation of the teal color, which I'll grab from here. This is most definitely a haptic approach to doing styling. Most designers likely would not like what I'm currently doing. But I would say, this is even quite a big step up from what we had over here with a nice, off color in the background with all the text being colored technically. And our foodness list is nice. And I'm going to change this padding to 1. I'm going to move the width for now. Get back to, actually kind of do want the width. Yeah. You'll notice CSS will do this sometimes, and which is why it makes it so painful to write. I spend most of my day just trying to fight with this stuff. A big missing thing is though, and for my own sake, I'm going to delete from food where name equals, and I'm going to take this, I'm going to paste this in here, and I'm going to hope that I've just removed it. That's how you fix it. If you fix your website just by, if a user uploads something with a big name, you just delete it, you know? It looks great. But we don't have any of the icons. So we had some cool icons here. You might be saying, is this built into the browser? How do you do this? So you can actually kind of figure it out. So if you right click here and you go into this inspect element window and you look, let's remove this mode for now, you'll see that this is simply just an A tag with an href on it. So this is my actual GitHub link. And then we have an I tag with a class of fab fa2x fa GitHub. And if we actually click on like what is fa GitHub, you'll see fa GitHub itself comes from all.css. If we click on all CSS, you'll see we get this massive CSS file that's just one line. And you might say it's literally 35,000 lines of CSS. This is font awesome. And this is a bit that I haven't covered yet. And obviously, when you build websites, usually you do not build them from scratch. We're writing raw CSS because if you write raw CSS, you understand it better. But you might have heard of things before like Bootstrap. Bootstrap is a CSS library that gives you websites that kind of look like this. You probably have seen Bootstrap things before with, you know, buttons and centered and other icons like that. And the reason we haven't been using Bootstrap is that, in my opinion, it's better to learn CSS and then learn Bootstrap so you actually know what Bootstrap's doing. But in most cases, you will be using a library that somebody else has written. If you're writing React, for example, we haven't covered React, but at my old work, we used to use something called Material UI. So if you want to get Google's Material Design with all their fancy buttons and all their fancy components and stuff, it is actually possible to use Material UI to basically take care of the bulk of the tricky stuff for you. But anyways, back to the actual task at hand here. The task at hand is to do the logic of adding the icon. So if you see here, this is being added by a CSS file, but the CSS file itself doesn't actually live in the website. If we go to the head, and usually the head is where you load CSS, you'll see we have our style sheet, which I've defined in a file. We also then have a separate style sheet that's coming from Font Awesome itself. So we take this line of code. You can actually right-click on the line and do edit as HTML, and then copy it. And let's take this and steal it to our layout.html, like so. Put it up here. And now refresh the page, and it, not this page, the other page. You'll see initially it has no effect. But we do indeed actually have that style sheet in our CSS now. So if we actually go in here and steal some code from this end, go into our body, into our content, into our profiles, into this, let's just, you know, why not just steal this entire div? Let's just edit this entire div as HTML, copy everything in it, come into our layout, come down to the bottom and pass the content. Let's just think quite similar. Paste this in here, just like that. We come over to this page, refresh, and ta-da! We actually have copied over the exact same stuff we had over here, albeit obviously not as well formatted. But it now technically exists on the other page. So we might be asking, well, what did you do to actually change it? You'll see I have one line of code. So all this stuff here is wrapped in a div called profiles with a div beneath it. So if I grab all this code here, and I'm going to create something quite similar, I'm going to call this div of div with a class name of profile. Come up here to our CSS, create a dot profile, send some CSS, format it so it's not broken. Right. I'm just being quite slow for some reason. think I mentioned this before, but if you see me basically using my keyboard to move around and delete stuff, I use VS Code with Vim key bindings because I'm built different. But you'll see we have, oh, it's a div and a div beneath it. Give me 1 second. So it's our profiles div with a div beneath it, like so. Get all this to right. So now we have this. Still not really preferable, but you'll see if we actually go to the style.css, you'll see there's profiles and then profiles I and profiles A as well. A nice thing I did before is you'll actually see in example code, I added comments above the different sections explaining what each piece is. And like I said, you can do this with Google. You can go on Google right now, you can do inspect element, and you can actually see how Google does CSS. Now, likely it'll be thousands of lines of CSS and quite complicated, but by the design of websites, there's nothing stopping you from doing that. Oh, profiles, profile. There we go. We literally have the exact same line for line implementation, but instead, I think it's full black. I think what we have to do is come up to here and add I to our list of tags that we are selecting. Yep, and now it's the right color we want it to be. And because we put it in the layout page, we can actually change that and go to every subpage and view all of the same stuff as the example project itself with the contact page that isn't done because Mo didn't push his code. Yeah, that is colors. I know I asked a question before about if anyone had anything they thought they'd like to see or add. If you do have anything, let them know in the comments. In the chat. I still have a couple more tricks up my sleeve of things to add to this website to make it look a bit better. But like I said, if anyone wants to see anything special, let me know. I will definitely oblige. What I'm about to do right now actually is make everything on every subpage centered the same way that the blog itself is centered. So I'm going to come into the About Center. I'm going to see, what did I do for About? About is display flex, flex direction, item center. So I don't want these, but I do want the ability to size something specifically. I'm going to create a new class called generic container. And I'm going to say this is going to have a max width of 60 vertical width. And yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to go to the blog listing and I'm going to say, I probably can apply this to the layout itself. I'm going to do that. What am I? This is tricky because I want it to be a bit smaller, but I still want the image on the front page to be full size. So if I put the whole thing in a div, then everything will be squat. But that would be a bit easy to do. I'm probably going to do that. That's going to be easy. So I'm going to our layout, and I'm going to wrap what is the content here in a div with a class of container. Actually, to make it the same as the Ginger, I'm going to call it content. Or actually, content wrapper, if I can spell correctly. Content wrapper. It's nice giving your CSS good names because similar to variables, also all CSS is in the same namespace. So if you define class block once and then define it again, they'll technically be the same. So that gets a bit interesting. So now if I come into here, we'll see our nothing is that different. Class container, oh, container hyphen. There we go. Class equals container. See why I'm doing two divs in a second. It'll make sense. We want the container wrapper. The container wrapper itself is actually going to be what's going to do display flex, justify content center. I'm going to make the content itself have a max width of 60% of the viewport width.
Jack, I think And the CSS is called content, I guess, right? Or like it's called content there, and the other it's called container.
I do that too many times. I'm just I'm in a headspace of trying to talk and explain it, and then my fingers are just doing silly things. That will most definitely have an effect. There we go. So now the main container itself is wrapping everything. So we have if we actually look at how this renders in the page itself, you will see that we have a content wrapper like so, and then a content within it. So the content wrapper has our display flex on it, and then it has our justify content center, just like that. It's simple as that, which is quite nice. We go to the projects page, and because we applied that to the main CSS, it means everything has the exact same styling. We want two as well. Is max width 60 vertical width. We also want min width as well. Max and a min. Is it possible? I think it's possible. Not mix, min width. What this will do, there we go. So now every page will have the same width, which is kind of what I expected to do. The about page itself also still looks fine. Yeah. No ideas in the chat so far, so I'll just keep going with what I have here. I'm going to get into animations, which is going to be, I'd say, easier than you'd expect. But a lot of people would likely reach for something like jQuery or something in this situation. I'm not going to. I'm going to write, yet again, some raw CSS because that's what I do. I'm going to use the animation subsection of the web.dev/learn/CSS, and I'm going to steal some stuff from it. So animation, for anyone who's done video editing, you know that it's based on usually keyframes, especially if you've done anything like any animated work with regards to drawings and stuff. You have something at some point in time and something at another point in time. And during those points in time, it is either a certain color or a certain position, so on and so forth. And CSS has something built in for you that you can do this. So you see we have at keyframes, my animation, from this statement to this statement. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to slap it into the code as is, and fix the indentation. And I'm going to call this one, keep my animation. And I'm going to figure out how to actually apply this. So I'm going to do this. Let me just see if I can find an example that shows you how to apply all of them at once. 1 second. These are all really good, but what I really want is this. Yes, this is exactly what I want. So the animation shorthand. Instead of defining the properties separately, you can define them in an animation shorthand, which says you define the animation properties in the following order: animation name, duration, timing function, delay, iteration count, direction, fill mode, play state. So I'm going to take this entire line and I'm going to create a class called .animate. This. So I'm going to use animation. It's going to take 10 seconds to run. It's going to ease in, then out, which it'll ease into it and then ease out as well. It'll delay with 1 second. We actually want 0. We don't want any delay. Iteration count, we probably want once. There is a once. Animation. What's it again? Not easing function. Iteration count. Yes, I want once, meaning the animation will run 1 time. And I'm pretty sure most of the other ones I don't really care about, like, direction, fill mode, play state. So what I can do is I can actually just remove the rest of these. So I'll go over this once more and they can talk about it here. The name of the animation is the first argument, my animation. The 10 seconds is the duration. It'll use ease in, ease out as the timing function. It'll have our 0 is the delay, and 1 is the iteration count. Obviously, we haven't applied this to anything just yet. So why not? Let's apply this. We could do it to the entire content. And let's do that. Animate. So our animation says that it should translate Y 20 pixels and translate Y 0 pixels. So let's see what this actually does. It right now seems to do nothing, which is okay. And this is the debug stage. So dot animate, class animate. Let's see if it's complaining. If we give it an invalid property, it will actually tell us and complain about not being able to do it. So in this case, if you type invalid CSS, it'll actually tell you what's wrong with it. Invalid property value. Can you tell me why? That'd be great. 10 seconds. Recording is not too sure what just happened there.
Sorry, my internet went down for a second.
It just, I think the recording blipped as well. Not sure what effect that'll have, but it's all right. You can fix it in post. Okay, so now we have this. So now the whole page kind of comes up once it comes in, which still is a little bit too long. So let's make this now from this to let's make this 0.2 seconds. Now we get this. It's a little bit too fast, I'd say. 0.6. Bit nicer. And what we want as well is we want it to, instead of easing in, we want it to ease out. So you can actually come into here and you can play around. And this is great. You can actually see all of the animation properties. So right now it's ease in out. It could do in out, could do a bunch of different stuff. What we want actually is likely a ease out, because we kind of want it to fade in, move in quickly, but then once it is moved in, it needs to slow down. So now we have this. And what we can also do as well is we can add more properties. So we can do opacity. So from 0.8 to 1. Now we get this really nice little, almost like flush. I think we should bring this down to 0.5. Here we go. Now we could spend some time figuring out how to fade things in as they appear on the screen. That is a bit more complicated. And in those circumstances, I likely would reach for an actual library instead of trying to do that yourself. But you can see it's already pretty easy. We can even do technically animations when we hover over things. We can do animations when we, click on things. So let's make it so that these things pop out a bit when we animate over them. So I want to take my animation, and I want to say this is going to be my food item pop out animation. So I want it to go from scale, I think that's a function, from scale 0 to scale 1 rem, food item pop out. So I'm going to do dot food item. I'm going to take this code over here before and change this to food item pop out, just like this. And you'll notice what this will do is this is not going to do anything because I've done something wrong, as per usual. I think.
That's the normal process, I guess. It's always like that.
Oh, it's not food item. It is, I did the structure of food list container item. Right. I thought I could create a food item. Food list dot container dot item. Most of this entire session has been literally just me I had a vague structure of how I wanted to do this session, but not like even exactly how we were going to do CSS here. This was all just kind of spitballing. There we go. We get this. I think this already looks kind of cool. You know, get this little like fade in. But what we wanted was that this should actually go from like 1 to like 2. I think you can just do this. This will now make them all big. Just not really what we want. We want it to actually happen. You hover over them. So you can actually do this. Item : hover. Now we get CSS that is applied on hover. You'll notice it's also, it's not holding it. It's supposed to actually, it's supposed to play it, and then it's supposed to actually end up staying in the hover state. So what do CSS hover animation, because I forget specifically how you would do this. You do transition. That's not, thank you W3 Schools for showing me how not to do it. So we want the animation to play, and then we want the animation to finish once we actually have it done. So I'll translate why. Actually, I think what I can do is I can make the hover state of the element the scaled up version, like so. Yes, this is actually kind of what I wanted to do. I was trying to do keyframe animation. What I want is I want to apply the transform once I hover over the item, which is the better way of doing it, which yet again, this is going to be a bit jarring, but technically it is applying the CSS that I specify. Let's make it just a bit smaller. You know, it's not bad, not the best user experience, but not horrendous. Let's say I want to do easing. So animation ease in after hover. Is out after hover. How to fade out after hover is done with CSS. So there's an easing part. I can apply this, and this transition is all. So I'll show you what this does before I explain it in detail. I'm going to apply this property on the item. When I hover it, I'm going to apply a transform, but I'm going to apply a transition as well. So now we get this. Which is a lot better than we had before. Still not really as fast, and we kind of want a ease in and ease in and out. Let's make this 0.3 seconds. There we go. We get this, which is still a little bit too slow. Make the scale like 1.1 maybe. Here we go. I'd say this is the intended UI we want here. Just make them a bit bigger. Let's put a mouse over them. Just like that. And I was reaching for the full keyframe animation, but to be honest, the transform plus the transition is great. But what this does is this means that when it transitions from one state to another, it'll actually apply a little grace period between those transitions. So in this case, when we hover, we change it to 1.1. When we stop hovering, it goes back to 1 again. But this here states that there should be a transition from that 1.1 value to the 1. So I will be honest in stating that that is basically it for what I think front end needs to be covered. I mentioned things like Bootstrap. There's also something that I've used on personal projects called Tailwind, which lets you do most of the stuff that we just did, except it gives you an absolute ton of predefined classes to do so, and has an absolutely massive set of documentation with regards to like, how do I do flex with Tailwind? Shows you all the examples of how to do flex. And there's also something that I haven't touched on at all, that is called grid, CSS grid. And CSS grid, yet again, is a newer way of approaching it, and it allows you to create basically very complicated grid layouts. Very useful if you're doing things like web applications. The amount of depth in CSS and in web programming, it goes pretty deep. I've been doing this professionally for about 3 years, and I still feel like I know nothing most of the time. I know enough to do my job, but most of the time I'm relying on the internet. So don't feel bad if you run into issues. CSS is hard. The internet is there to help. As mentioned many times before, if you run into any issues and stuff, the Discord is open. But I'm going to push it over to Kamal to cover some of the final mentions of the bootcamp, outline exactly how we're going to be accepting repositories and projects and how the pricing system will work and some timelines and such.
That was great. Thank you, Zach. That was a really cool session. I did pick up a few things myself as well, so it was nice. So yeah, everyone, this is it. This is the end of our last session for Dev Bootcamp, and we're really happy, and like we really appreciate all the time that you've put so far. So I know you guys have been building your websites, and so for the next step is basically we're doing this bootcamp for for you guys to learn, and we want to ensure that this process is happening. So what we'll be doing is that we'll be creating a form for basically everyone to just submit their project, sort of to, first of all, to check that those requirements have been met, and like people have been following up with the sessions. And more importantly, we have the certificates that we want to give out to people, and also $200 in prizes. So basically, and Jack, please correct me if I'm wrong here. So there is a form that we're going to be sending out to people next week, or actually rather like this upcoming Wednesday.
August 4th, I believe. Let me check the date on that.
Correct.
Yeah, so August 4th, we're opening up the a Google form that you'll use to put in your GitHub username. Well, actually, not GitHub username, the link to the repository for the project itself, and as well on top of that, your name and a like small little description of like what your project is. If you have any like rationalizations behind like if you've chose to maybe not include a blog, but instead of having a blog, you have something else, we'll have a thing set up for that. And that's not opening today, but that'll be opening the 4th to give some time for people to spend some time doing UI, UX on that.
Yep. So also, if you chose to include, or to run your application, host it on Python Anywhere as well. That was also an optional thing, but that would also be good to see the final product. So yeah, just to confirm the dates. So the submission opens on August 4th, which is this Wednesday, to give people some time to work on the UI design and all those things. And then we'll be accepting submissions until August 15th. So you can submit any time during this time window. And then we'll have a week to review all the submissions, and until August 22nd, which is when we plan to announce the people who are going to receive the prizes, which is a total of $200, and as well as the certificates, which will be given out to those to people who completed the requirements.
One thing I want to mention as well is, although the sessions themselves are over, I feel until the actual the due date of the thing, for example, you can continue to iterate and work on your projects. The Discord's still open. Me and Mo are still available. We're still here. If you have any questions or want any help, I'll admit the Discord's not as active as I would have liked it to be. But there's no reason that can't change now that there's an actual due date and a specific description of what needs to be done. But yeah, so sessions themselves aren't going to be on the go, but we're still available to help out.
Yeah, and you have the recordings on YouTube as well if you're stuck at any point in time. So a couple more announcements that I wanted to make. So we have this survey form that we'd love for everyone to fill out. So I know this is our first ever bootcamp for Hackfrost NL. Maybe some parts of it were like a bit messy and we were like running around and such. But we would really appreciate all feedback that we can get, because we always want to improve and make this kind of bootcamp even better, especially that we're planning to return. Hopefully university is going to be on campus next semester. So we'll be sending out survey forms through emails, through Eventbrite, and also on Discord. So your opinion is really valued. The last piece of announcement was actually the fun part. So we're having a social event on our public Discord. It's for everyone, just an end of bootcamp social event. It's gonna be split into two parts. First part, we're gonna be playing a game called Jackbox. It's not a one game; it's just a bunch of games, but it's really fun. And also there is just after that we're gonna be chatting a little bit. So feel free to join. It's gonna be tomorrow, and it's gonna happen on our Discord as well. So we hope to see you there.
Cool. If anyone has any closing questions, I guess now would be a good time. I guess you can probably stop the recording. Come on.
Yeah, I guess things seem to be winding down.
Yep.
So can I call myself a full stack developer?
You can definitely say you have dabbled in the stack. However, the full stack requires a bit more time to be to be involved with. But yeah, I'd say the good thing about this bootcamp is it touches everything. It touches the back end, touches the front end, touches the deployment. So if you followed through everything we've done so far and applied all of it, yeah, I guess by definition you are a full stack developer. Still junior, if you've just done the bootcamp. But yes, definitely, this bootcamp has touched on everything from building the website to the back end to the front end to the CSS and to even the database and the deployment. So yeah, I guess you could consider this a full stack. Definitely narrowed to specific stacks and Python and HTML and CSS. But I guess the answer is yes.
Thank you, Sam, for your lovely message there.
Yeah, I think Kamal, you mentioned about people having potentially school stuff on the go, yep. Final exams, yeah. So not necessarily the best timing, but hopefully the bulk of your projects, if you've started them already, might be done. So hopefully applying the final styling shouldn't be too strenuous. Feel free to submit, even if you haven't gotten very far or you've only gotten half the requirements done, feel free to submit it. Might as well. No reason not to.
Yeah, and you can even complete it after the deadline if you're if you're too busy or if you don't find the time. But the deadline should be after the last date of the final exam, so you have some wiggle room there. Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Yud, for your messages there.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah, so I guess that's a wrap, right?
That's a wrap. I mean, we still have work to do, but as far as sessions go, here we go. 4 hours of sessions, not 4 hours, 90 minutes. Going on 6 hours.
Yeah, almost.
Yeah, fun. All right.
All right.
Well,
Have a
see you
great
guys.
day, everyone. Bye bye.